Folks, we have breaking news. U.S. defense officials have just confirmed to Fox News that the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier has arrived. It's a whole group of these in the eastern Mediterranean, just off the coast of Israel. According to the Navy, this is called the biggest and baddest warship, and its presence in the Middle East is to send a very clear message to Iranian-supported militants, including Hamas and Hezbollah, that the U.S. stands with Israel. President Joe Biden just addressed the nation from the White House and reaffirmed the United States' commitment to Israel in its war against Hamas. Biden said, "We are sending additional military assistance, including ammo and interceptors, to replenish the Iron Dome, which Israel uses to neutralize more than 5,000 incoming rockets from Gaza." Listen.
The loss of innocent life is heartbreaking. Like every nation in the world, Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. I just got off the phone with a third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I told him the United States experience what Israel is experiencing, our response will be swift, decisive, and overwhelming.
Where do the presidential candidates stand? 2024 GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy tweeted his support for Israel this weekend, saying, quote, "I am appalled by the barbaric and medieval Hamas attacks. Shooting civilians and kidnapping children are war crimes. Israel's right to exist and defend itself should never be doubted, and Iran-backed Hamas and Hezbollah cannot be allowed to prevail. I stand with Israel, and the U.S. should, too." This comes after Ramaswamy back in August generated some controversy when he told the Washington Free Beacon, quote, "The true mark of success for the U.S. and Israel will be to get a 2028 where Israel is so strongly standing on its own 2 feet." The entrepreneur and 2024 GOP candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, is here with me now. All right, here and now in the moment. Yeah. Please tell me what you are thinking, especially in light of the news that Mike Tobin of Fox News has brought to viewers today, just a few hours ago, that Israeli soldiers have finally made it into some of the attacked areas and have found decapitated infants.
I mean, this is inhumane. These are war crimes. And Israel's response should be decisive, as I expect that it will be. And the U.S. role here should absolutely be to stand with Israel diplomatically, intelligence sharing, going further and providing munitions where needed for Israel to preserve its national existence. Israel has a right to defend its borders. Israel has a right to defend its national existence. And the United States should absolutely be behind Israel as it does, while also making sure, and I think this is critical, that we do not see a broader war in the Middle East that would not advance U.S. interests. I think we can do both of those things effectively, and I do think it's going to take a cool-headed, rational, but decisive response behind Israel to make sure the right thing happens here.
Okay, let's talk about U.S. interests. Israel is the only democracy in the entire region.
That's correct.
Colonel Ralph Peters once said to me, Israel is the only democracy, the only smart-thinking nation between Greece and Australia. I mean, there's a huge area in between. That includes Russia, Iran, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. But that's the interest that we have, that, I hate to say friend, because we know that countries don't have friends, they have interests. But don't you think that that means that forever and a day the United States needs to fund and support militarily Israel?
Well, I've said very clearly since day one and all along is that we will not cut off aid to Israel until Israel tells us they're ready for it. People say, what nation would ever say that? The one nation that said it was actually Israel when it was led by Bibi in the mid-1990s when it came to civilian aid. So that's how deep our relationship runs.
Civilian aid is different from military support.
Absolutely. And so the U.S. will not cut off aid to Israel until Israel tells us they're ready for it. But right now we have a much more serious emergency on our hands, and we need to talk about how to respond to that right now. And I do think that one of the careful things that we need to make sure of here is that we are supporting Israel. Israel is able to defend itself and its own borders, while at the same time making sure that does not lead us down the siren song of a road to a prolonged and extended, broader regional war in the Middle East. That is something that we should also be able to lead diplomatically to avoid. So I think intelligence sharing, diplomatic support, telling the UN its historical practice of equating a false moral equivalence between Israel's defense of itself versus the enemies that attack Israel, we're not going to stand for that. But at the same time, we have to take a leadership role that is sound and level-headed.
I want to get to the southern border in 1 second, but before we go on this, as we said, the USS Gerald Ford steamed very quickly to the region. It has arrived on Israel's shores. If it came down to it, if you were president and things got ugly, we've got at least four American hostages, 14 Americans killed by the terrorists. Would you put boots on the ground if it came to that?
Well, look, I think that part of America First means leaving no American left behind. And so I do think that there can be room for looking at various options to get our American hostages back home. Beyond that, I think our job is to stand behind Israel as Israel decides what its correct response is going to be. Historically, Israel has had some debates internally about whether or not they want control over Gaza or not. Those are pros and cons for Israel. That's a decision for Israel to make. The U.S. should stand behind Israel in whatever decision Israel does make, while making sure that we don't drag ourselves into another prolonged, large, regional-scale conflict in the Middle East. And that's exactly how I would lead.
As we remember what happened during the Reagan era in Lebanon, a lot of U.S. lives were lost. Let's get to the southern border, because the Border Patrol has released some very worrisome numbers that we want to put up on the screen. The southern border is, porous is a friendly way of putting it.
That's right.
But streaming over the border have been people from countries that hate us.
Yes.
Special interest alien apprehensions, as they're called. Afghanistan, 6,386 people have come in. Pakistanis, 1,613. 659 Iranians. 538 Syrians. We're not painting everybody with the same brush here. Some of these people may very well be refugees. But what is the first step that we must take right now? Joe Manchin, yesterday,
yes,
of West Virginia, Democrat, said, seal the border. Let's get the ones who are in, 3 million of them, on the path to citizenship. They can fill jobs here that Americans don't want to fill. But what is your idea?
Well, I agree with the first half of what he said. I disagree with the second half. Sealing the southern border and the northern border, too, Liz. This is ignored. That has to be the correct step of the next commander-in-chief. I visited the northern border just a few days ago. To call that porous is an overstatement. That is completely open. And when we look at the dangers of terror cells potentially in the United States, this is a national security issue for America. And so one of the questions, even as this relates to the Israel question, we need to get to the bottom of what the heck happened with the failure of U.S. and Israeli intelligence that allowed a disaster like this to unfold. Some have said that's a question for later. I think it's a question for now. But the wake-up call for the United States of America is that if this can happen in Israel, it can happen right here at home in the United States on our own homeland. And I think that's something, a new reality that we in this country need to contend with, open our eyes to that risk, seal that southern border, but even more importantly, use law enforcement to get to the bottom of who else is already here. And I've also said part of the plan here for supporting Israel is getting anybody who has been a resident alien in the United States, affiliated with Hamas or similar groups, get them out and even extradited to Israel if necessary. That's what it means to protect this homeland.
Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you for coming in studio. I suspect we will be speaking a lot, I hope so, as we get closer to the 2024 election.
It's good seeing you. Thank you for having me.